Okay. Right. Well, Henrik, I'm blushing at your introduction. Thank you very much. And I'm delighted you call me a lady of the performance world because I was just happy to be a pack girl, especially after the last conference was only pack men. So I'm delighted to be one of the pack ladies presenting here today. You did a great job of introducing me already and also introducing Itacore. You're exactly right. I'm sitting in Switzerland, which is not so sunny today. We've had a lot of stormy weather. I think it's been crazy weather this year for everybody. But yes, it's a beautiful place to live and a great place to work. A lot of really interesting companies based in Switzerland. And I'm when I was contacted by Neotis, to ask about to present something in performance testing, I wanted to pick something that was a little bit unique. So I've selected this business case to talk about, and I think it ties in well with I think the news from last year that Neotis is supporting the SAP GUI protocol. So for me it was a good excuse to talk about SAP, which although I'm passionate about enterprise testing, I'm also pretty passionate about SAP projects. So I can bring these together in one presentation. So in terms of performance tests, my performance testing experience, I'm not a performance test engineer, but I've been involved in a lot of performance test management and organization. So I've been involved in setting up at least 2 multinational performance competency centers, and I've run one of those competency centers for several years. And so probably all in all, I've participated, led, or managed well over 100 performance tests. I use performance generically for load, performance engineering, whatever. Um, so often in performance testing, we're called on to do load, and that's often the first thing people think about is load testing. And load testing is great, and it's really exciting, and I love throwing tens of thousands of users at a system and seeing what happened. And sometimes we're asked to really look at one screen in depth, and look at the performance of that screen. And in fact, the last 4 days I've been in a workshop with experts from UI, Java, and backend, and we've all been analysing this one particular screen that's critical in an application. It's got terrible performance, and we're trying to see how we can get it down. And this project was a little bit different for me because the customer was really interested in just the clicks of one user. So talk a little bit about the structure of the project, and then we'll introduce the challenge. So the structure of my presentation today is I'm going to describe what the challenge was. I'll give you the context of the customer. Henrik's already said that it's SAP, and particularly SAP Extended Warehouse Management System. So just give a brief introduction, especially as not everybody's worked in the SAP world. And then I want to talk about why it was particularly challenging. Once I've got that out of the way, then I've got what I call 7 smart things that we did on this project. I might have done some of them on other projects, but for me, it was really unusual to have all of these things on a single project. And then I'll wrap up. Okay, my 1-second challenge. So my customer, and I'm not going to talk about specifically what my customer, which customer it is. There's a lot of multinationals in Switzerland, and I can say it's a multinational with many warehouses. And they were implementing an extended warehouse management system. And this system was going to be a template. It was going to be a pilot, and it was going to be a template for all the rest of their warehouse management systems in the world. So they really, really wanted to get this right. And for them, performance was extremely important, and particularly the performance for the operators. So, particularly for the operator transactions that were involved with the RF devices, the RF clicks. So we're talking about forklift operators, receiving operators. So everything involved with the RF device. Every other transaction was interesting too, but particularly the RF device transactions, they wanted them to be less than 1 second. Okay. Now, they were pretty confident about the size of the system. And so they said to me, Helen, we're not actually that interested in load testing right now. We might be later, but we've actually oversized the system. So please just focus on a single user and just these clicks. So my initial thought was, well, this isn't going to be very difficult. We'll just have to measure them. But I started talking to the experts who knew a lot more about the extended warehouse management system to me, and I figured out that actually testing what the clicks would be under real-world conditions and actually demonstrating the repeatability, accuracy of those was actually going to be quite challenging. So before we get more into the actual challenge of the project, I'll just give a small introduction to SAP. So if you've worked with SAP before, you'll know all about this. If you haven't worked with SAP, you've probably heard of it. Your company that you're working with probably has, if it's a medium to large company, probably has an SAP system or two tucked away somewhere, if only to do finance and purchasing, could be doing a lot more. And if you haven't worked directly with it, you've probably worked with a system that interfaces with it. It's almost everywhere in large companies, and it's a huge system. Um, so SAP's strength, in my opinion, was that it was really the first to appear on the market back in the 70s. And when they built the system originally, they built it with a philosophy that they wanted it to be multi-currency, multi-country, multi-language, um, and they wanted all the modules to integrate, because back in the 70s you might have one system that handled purchasing, another system that handled finance, and you'd have batch programs in between them, and they wanted absolutely everything to be integrated. So they built that with this in mind. And today in 2018 that sounds remarkably obvious, but back in that day that was quite innovative. And what was additionally innovative was that they said, okay, we don't want to make coding changes to programs. We want to build the system so that you can configure the tables, or the screens can be influenced by the data. And so they built the whole system with this in mind, the configuration and integration. And in fact, if you have seen SAP, you'll see the word DINPRO every so often. They refer to screens as DINPROs. And that actually stands for dynamic program, because they wanted to say it's not just a simple screen, kind of mainframe style with input and output. It's actually a dynamic program. And that screen will change based on your master data, based on the master data that's influenced by configuration, be very flexible. So that's SAP. What particularly confounds people when they start working with an SAP, because often I have testers that maybe they worked on only web applications and they come over, they work with SAP, and I think the first thing that hits them is the language is entirely different. People talk in a very obscure language. They talk about IDOCs and SM30 and ALE and QRFC, and people seem to understand them, and that can be quite a barrier to understanding what's going on in the project. The second thing that I think shocks the testers is really how much the data influences their transactions. And it's not just maybe the direct data that the transactions are using, but maybe data that is using data. And it's very difficult to understand why something worked one day and the next day it hasn't worked. And I think the third thing that seems quite strange if you're not used to the SAP world is quite how closed it seems. It has its own tools for everything. It also has its own tools for transport management, its own tools for monitoring and diagnostics, its own tools for check-in and deployment, its own protocols, and we'll look at those as well. So it's really a kind of a world of its own with a language of its own. But I think after at least a few months of a project, I think people can get past that and start working well within an SAP project. So you can see it's a huge number of modules. People that work with SAP, they tend to specialize in one particular module, might be procurement or logistics, and they'll know everything about that module. It's very rare that you find people that can cross multiple modules. So the module I'm interested in is the inventory and warehouse management, which is highlighted in red. This is known as the WM module in SAP. And what's interesting is that it's going away in 2025. SAP will stop supporting it. And what they're saying is you can replace this with SAP EWM, which is the extended warehouse management. So small look at extended warehouse management. So I introduce myself by saying I'm no performance engineer, and I'll also introduce by saying I'm no extended warehouse management expert. But I did learn a bit about warehouse management in the context of this project. So what I learned was that there are really two key processes that I had to focus on from a performance perspective, and that was inbound processing and outbound processing. And it's actually what it says on the label. So inbound processing is stuff coming into your warehouse. I always like to think of IKEA because then I can actually visualize it. But So things come into your warehouse, they might come in via trucks, which is a normal method. They might come in via rail. They might come in on pallets, on sacks, in liquid form, on train. So EWM can handle all of that. And that's one of the things that we'll manage on the inbound processing. So you have an inbound delivery, and an inbound delivery just really means, for example, I've got a truck that's coming in, and that truck's going to have 100 pallets of something on it. And my warehouse operator has got to get each one of those pallets into the right place in the warehouse as efficiently as possible. And when he's clicking that RF device and clicking on the things, then there's a lot of calculations going on in the background of exactly where that should be. There's also some complexities about, the trucks arriving. So the trucks arrive, they have to dock in, they have to make appointments, they block a door, and when they block a door, you've got to wait until that delivery is finished before you carry on. So that's all the inbound processing is, trucks coming in, inbound deliveries. On the outbound side, that's things leaving. So when I go and buy something from IKEA, and I end up taking a whole truckload home, there's somebody who goes and he's got a pick list, and he's going to go and pick out the things I need to take with me. Or if I've got a truck coming, there's a big load of products that need to be picked from the warehouse. And again, the warehouse operator's got his list there of what he has to pick, and the system is calculating each time, okay, what's the best route to get to which shelf, which product do I take? It's taking into account the other products that are in the warehouse, it's taking into account the best shelf, it's taking into account how old they are. So it's doing a lot of different calculations in the background with each one of these clicks. And again, my challenge was these clicks had to be less than 1 second. So that's from a business process. At least the key processes that we had to focus on were inbound processing and the warehouse operations tasks that were associated with that, and the outbound processing or outbound deliveries and the warehouse tasks associated with that. Okay. I just liked this slide actually, and I liked it because it had the forklift operator and the little guy there, and it always helps me to remember that behind all my business processes that we're testing is there's actually a warehouse out there with real people having to do something, but I don't have anything to add there. So this slide is an important slide, and it looks a bit ugly and it looks a bit scary, but there's only really two things that are important to note on this slide. Okay, so what this shows here is it's just an overview of the data flow, and very simplified for the inbound and outbound delivery processes. So the first important thing to notice is on the left-hand side, we've got the SAP ERP system. This is the mothership. This is the mothership with all the logistics, and this is calculating what's coming in, what's due to come in, what's due to go out, what the customers need, what procurements need, what logistics need. So the SAP ERP system will send the deliveries. I was going to put my phone on mute. Sends the deliveries over to the EWM system. Okay, it sends other things as well. So the first thing to note is EWM is a separate system from SAP, but there's integration. The second thing to note is that this integration is via some SAP specific protocols, and I've got them marked. It's QRFC and IDOC. It doesn't really matter how these work. QRFC happens to be synchronous and IDOC happens to be asynchronous. But the point is they're proprietary SAP protocols, and SAP talks very nicely to other SAP systems with these protocols. But this is important for how we designed our testing, was really being able to hack into these interfaces. So this is what the system looks like from a data perspective. So what was challenging about this actual testing? So I had to prove that the RF device transactions were going to be 1 second or less. Okay, and where they weren't 1 second or less, we had to get them down to that, and we had to prove that that performance had been improved. It wasn't just a lucky fluke that somebody had run it on that particular day. We had to prove that reliably that it had got down. So the first piece of the testing challenge was, and when I arrived on this project, they'd already been doing some performance testing ad hoc, and so they were able to tell me some of their challenges so far. But over on that SAP side was just the time to set up the inbound and outbound deliveries was huge. So we had several different variants, and you had to make sure that your customer was there and the customer had credit and there was the right product, and there were a lot of different conditions, and it was taking a huge amount of time just to set up the deliveries. On top of that, a lot of other people had access to this data, and it could be constantly changing. You didn't have any control over it whatsoever. It was a shared test system. And the third thing was that in order to have a realistic delivery is you had to have a large number of what were called handling units. I think of that as pallets, so maybe 70 or 100 pallets, and adding each one of those individually onto a delivery is very painful. So that was the first challenge, was, okay, how do we get rid of that SAP side? On the EWM side, again, they had a test system, and same thing is other people would go and change their test data. And also what other people were doing might influence the performance. There's a couple of pretty heavy performance transactions on the EWM, like wave release and some reporting transactions. And if you were trying to record performance response times, the same time someone was doing one of these, you wouldn't be 100% sure if you were getting bad performance because of your transaction or because of something that someone else had done on the system. Also, the way you configure a warehouse system is that you configure it like to say, okay, how many truck doors do I have? I've got 14, for example. And once these doors get blocked, that's it. You can't, if I've got 14 deliveries going in parallel and they haven't been finished, or someone's taken the truck, I can't do it. So I'm really dependent on other people in the system to have cleared the doors so that I can come in and bring my inbound delivery in for testing. And the third challenge with EWM is it's standard software. So you don't find a spec anywhere saying, okay, please look at this program, please look at this program. It's not exactly a black box, but the rules that it used are a little bit obscure. The third challenge we had was really response time variation, because we were looking at 1 second. So, if you had an iteration that was, 15 seconds but called 70 times, then these times could add up. And so we really wanted to make sure that we could have repeatable process, but in real world conditions. So, the experts told us that, you've got to, depends on the number of handling units in your delivery, the response time that's calculated is going to depend on the stock levels in your warehouse and also the type of products in the warehouse. What's the shelf life expiration of these products in the warehouse? Which meant that repeatability and accuracy was really important. So these were our testing challenges, and I love a good challenge. So our project goals were really that we had to set up this repeatable process with real world conditions, and to be accurate as well. So that meant we really had to be isolated. After that, we had to actually identify the performance improvements. So it wasn't just enough to find out that something was consistently, say, 4 seconds, but then we had to find out why it was 4 seconds and then go on and implement those changes in order to get it down to our target. And then third, we had to convincingly demonstrate that the code had been improved, that the performance had been improved through these changes. So these were our project goals. So on the project, I want to highlight 7 smart things that we did that perhaps I haven't done on every performance testing project. So the first one we did, and this might have been my favorite thing we did, was we set up a kind of virtualization. So if you remember all that mess on the SAP ERP side to set up deliveries, all that activity for us is completely wasted time because at the end of the day, it's not helping us in our performance testing. We just want to have an inbound delivery that looks exactly like the last inbound delivery. So I was very fortunate to have access to some great SAP experts. And one of them said, listen, Helen, there's a program in SAP that when a delivery is created and it's sent via the QRFC call over to EWN, and what we can do is we can hijack that program, we can take a copy of it, and instead of injecting the delivery that's just been created, we can inject a delivery, a template delivery, one that we've created before. And on top of that, we can also tell the QRFC to call it multiple times. I said, that sounds like a brilliant idea. So we got a program, and basically, we created, so one of our inbound delivery variables had, say, 70 handling units on it that had to be delivered, and maybe another of the inbound deliveries had 100 things, and then we had an outbound of a bunch of other stuff that had to be shipped. And so we would create that delivery, and it might be number 82, 62. And then we would just run this program saying, okay, please, I want 4 copies of this over in my EWM system. So it took quite a long time to set up that delivery. After that, within seconds, we could multiply this and have exact replicas over in our EWM system. In terms of benefit, it's saved us huge amounts of time from the ERP side. We're able to get rid of all of that. It meant that our test was 100% repeatable. Um, Now, you might also say, could you have used classic stubbing and virtualization? Uh, Possibly, and we did sort of half look at that, but the SAP consultants were already there saying, okay, listen, we can do it this way. We've got the programmer. Here's a program that works. And on top of that, this also tests the ERP delivery QRC. So great. This worked really well for us and saved us a huge amount of time. The second smart thing we did was um, we had great specs. And by that I mean we not only did we have really good specs where it would tell us test step by step what we had to do, but we also analyzed the actual warehouse, or one of the warehouses, to say, okay, what does a real delivery look like? What does a typical delivery look like? What's the size of it? What are the different composition of products that you have on it? What's the large delivery as well? So that we'd have a couple of different variants of, like, medium, representative, and then large. The second thing we wanted to look at was to automate the processes over on the EWM side. Now, we were a single user, so we did have the choice of using any kind of recording tool that would work on the SAP GUI protocol. So we'd have a choice of functional testing tools or performance testing tools. And we opted to go with a performance testing tool for several reasons. The first was that the SAP GUI protocol for performance testing is actually really nice. It's actually really nice to use. It's very stable. The thing that makes SAP testing hard is really the data and the steps and the complexity of the business logic, but the actual protocol itself is really nice and very stable. So we liked that, and we also liked that when you run it on a performance test mode, it actually runs faster on the machine because you're not working with the GUI the whole time. So we liked that. And third of all, I think just my performance test engineer wanted to work with that particular tool. The third thing, which I don't know if it was a smart thing, but it was something that was part of our parameters, is that we did our testing through an RF emulator. And we did have a conversation with the customer about, okay, we're not really testing end-to-end time, we're not testing the device time. And they said, yes, that's fine, Helen. We're really looking at the back end. This is the 1 second from the back end, from here to here, that's fine. The performance of the RF devices and the network, that will be part of a different project or a different task. So that was fine. The third thing is we were able to have an isolated test environment. I don't know if anybody's worked in SAP tests. I've worked in tons. I can't think of how many different SAP tests, and I can't think of one where I've ever been allowed to have my very own performance testing system. I've had times when I've been able to have the system all to myself, but I don't think I've ever had a time when I've been able to really have a dedicated system just for me. And we did look at whether we would take like a partition, a different client on the central test system, because first of all, we wanted to be isolated. We didn't want anybody messing around with our data. But then we were also a bit nervous about, okay, if we were doing something on the system and something else was going on the system, we wouldn't have complete control and we wouldn't be certain of the performance. So we got agreement that we could have our own dedicated system, which was just fantastic. It was such a treat. And we set up 2 clients, and there a client is kind of an instance within a system, and it's sort of an independent SAP instance you could use. And we set up a golden client with all our data exactly as we wanted, so that if ever our test client got messed up, we could refresh it from our golden client. The fourth thing that I was told that was really important by the warehouse management experts is that apparently picking things from an empty warehouse and putting things away in an empty warehouse is much simpler from a system perspective than picking or putting them away in a warehouse that's full of data, full of pallets with different shelf life expiry dates, taking up the shelves. The system has to work a lot harder, and you use a lot more logic paths when you've got a warehouse set up with a variety of goods and quite full. So what we did was we again talked to a friendly warehouse, and we got their levels, their actual stock levels from their warehouse, and we had a test, we had an automation tool that went and populated a lot of different stock into our warehouse to get it up to the right levels, so that we would make the system work harder when it was doing those clicks to calculate where it had to put away or where it had to pick. So we were very sensitive to the stock levels. When we were running our tests, also we'd have a lot of stock coming in when we were doing inbound deliveries, and we had a lot of stock going out. So eventually we'd have some product imbalances, and so we'd do some cleanup from time to time. But my performance test engineer had a really smart idea, because sometimes when he'd be running, he'd be going to pick as part of the test script, and he'd be going to pick a stock and see, oops, it wasn't there. So what he would do, he'd stop recording the response time, and he'd go and move some stock. He had a little routine, and he'd go and move some stock back in, and then he'd start recording again, and then he'd go and pick the stock. So we were always sure that our strips would always complete. They'd never run out of stock when they were running. Was a lot of stuff we did to make sure that we had a controlled environment, and that we could do it in a repeatable way, and also a very fast and efficient way. But as I said, that's one thing to identify that you've got long response times. It's another thing to understand why. So within SAP, there's a transaction called SD12 where you can run a trace capture. So pretty much you put in the name of the user you want to trace, and then you go and do something as that user, and then you stop recording, and you're able to go and see all the calls that are made in the system, and you can drill down on them, and you can see what time you spent in different parts. So it's a great tool if you happen to be an SAP engineer. It's a great tool to really understand where you're spending time and why. And so this screen here shows the calls. It shows how many times that call was made, and it's got the time it spent there. And it took me a long time to understand what this number that I was seeing, this 6-7 digit number in the middle, but it's actually microseconds. Okay. So we did another smart thing with this, is that if you could imagine our nightly test run would have multiple different inbound delivery variants, and each one would have maybe 70 or 100 pallets. And what we would do is we would take the response time for each one of these pallets and each one of these steps, and we would get lots and lots of, statistically lots of data. But every so often what we do is we'd stop recording the response time, and our script would go over to the SAP trace capture, and it would say, okay, I'm going to record the next few transactions. It would call the next few transactions, save the trace capture, and then it would come back, and we would take our response times and record those going on. So the point being was that we didn't want the trace capture to interfere with the response times that we were reporting. So we would just stop our own report during that time. And what would mean is that when we would come in the morning and we'd see the response times, and we see that, something looks high, we want to have the engineers take a look at that, we'd be able to show them, okay, this is the response times we were getting. We got 50 of these calls here, and they were all about in the range of 1.4 to 1.5 seconds. And by the way, here's some trace calls that we did during the same time, and they would be able to go and analyze them. And then being smart people that they were, they'd be able to identify coding changes that could be made and then implemented later. Which took us to the next thing that we did, which was to monitor the performance on an ongoing basis. So we would have these regression runs, and once we had everything set up, it was remarkably little effort to run, because we would just create the deliveries we wanted. That was one click, and then it was another click to set up the nightly runs, and the scripts would go off and do their job. Probably the thing that took the most time was getting the data out and then pumping it into Excel so that I could get this kind of regression. So what I've highlighted here on the left is some of the transactions that we were monitoring, and we specifically called RF if we were interested in that. I've got the 1 second mark highlighted there, so you see there's quite a few of the RF ones are under that. There's a particular transaction called the put away list, and that was 3 seconds, and at some point that goes down to 1.1 seconds. So that was part of demonstrating that there'd been a code improvement done during that. The other nice thing about monitoring the performance as we went is, although our environment was completely isolated in terms of system performance and also in terms of the test data, is we were receiving any of the changes that were happening to other programs, so we could also see if there was any negative effect from programs changes that other people were making on the track. Finally, the seventh and last smart thing that we did was my client really wanted to have a kind of reusable performance test methodology coming out of this project. So there's nothing I love more than putting together a nice methodology. So we put everything together, arranged around like the TMAP sections. And for each one of these sections, we had a drill down saying, okay, this is what you have to do. Here's the accelerators, here's the examples, here's where you find everything. So we kind of left that as a legacy from our project. And I turned out to be the biggest beneficiary, because I think 9 months later, they called me back and said, okay, Helen, we're implementing the HANA database, and we'd really like to run some performance tests. So we were able to crack this open and just step through each one of these things, finding our specifications, finding our templates, and reuse everything. So in summary, I really loved this project. For me, it was really unique to have a customer that was so passionate about performance so early along in a project, and that was willing to put resources and access to people to make this happen. So it's great to have budget. We don't always have the luxury, and the clients don't always have the luxury of that either. I think any performance tester knows that understanding the root cause, that requires really deep expertise. So it's one thing to find bad performance, it's another thing to understand why. And then the third one is that implementing the performance changes is even harder than finding them. Implementing them, improving them, it takes a lot to follow it through and get it through to the end. But we were delighted to be able to show that many of the significant transactions were able to get down to a decent performance time. So that's my wrap up. Henrik, I think I'm almost exactly 30 minutes.
I'm super impressed. So, what I can say, I mean, yeah, the 7 step that you recommended was awesome. All right, so I think I have no questions. I'm going to go back and have a power nap, because you did a really great job now. No. I think I really liked the topic, and I had some couple of concerns, in fact, related to the fact that you said that you removed ERP from the picture.
Yes.
And I was wondering if there was no issues that could be potentially related to the fact that ERP could add some queuing mechanisms or whatever it is, because you're adding an extra layer into the process. So here it seems that it was not requested by the client, but yeah, that was one of my concern about the fact that you were removing ERP and you never did the test with the ERP, enabled it again. So that was one
to your point, yeah. Again, the focus here was really on the EWM, and I'm trying to think if they looked at a volume test between. I don't think that's a big stress. I think they have that was certainly not something we discussed, is looking at the overall response time between there. That wasn't considered critical. What was difficult, though, is that first of all, everyone got completely confused because we had to cut off a lot of the communication back to the ERP system because we had this strange stubbing. So we had documents coming in that had never existed in the ERP. So we had to cut off communications that would have otherwise gone back to the ERP system. So that was another reason for really having an isolated system, was to make sure we had this one way coming in. I suppose you could have done that with a client as well, but it was when we had to come in and set it up in another system to do the HANA, we were like scratching our heads going, okay, this has to go in, and we have to make sure that this data is downloaded before we cut this protocol off and do that. So yeah, it was a little bit complex doing it, but the amount of time that it saved and the repeatability that it gave us was a huge benefit.
All right. That sounds. I mean,
did it sound convincing?
No, it makes sense. I mean, because obviously you were sort of automating and doing some trending from there, and you mentioned that you were using so you're doing everything by a click, but then you were extracting an Excel sheet. You didn't have the options to do the trending through a CI server such as Jenkins, for example, to save that processing time and reporting time that you were referring to?
That's a good question, and it's one of the things we looked at. We did make a suggestion to the customer saying, okay, if you want to go forward with this, like an ongoing kind of regression, then we made some suggestions, say this is one of the things that you would have to remove, was that manual step. But given that it was a relatively short project, to say 3 months, is that, yeah, we just did it with Excel and cut and pasted it for the short term. But you're absolutely right. If it was done more on a long term and ongoing basis, you'd want to look at automation or having some trending done that way.
Okay. And the last, I think, question from my side at least is, you were doing the monitoring with SAP Trace Capture, but you didn't never use the solution SAP Solution Manager in the context of that project.
Not in the context of this project, no, because we were really just looking at the single user. I'm not a huge Solman expert, but they have a lot of diagnostics at the system level to saying, okay, what's the CPU, what's the performance, what's going on here. And as an individual transaction, you can get some information, but the trace capture really does that, traces it at the program call level, and that was just the best tool to be able to understand the single click of the single user. But if you were looking at doing a load test, then absolutely you'd want to look at what was going on in Solman. Whenever I do load tests, I always look at Solman to look at all their statistics there and get the reports out of there. Yep.
So you also answered directly during the presentation one of our questions. It was related to the scan guns. So it seems that they were connected through HTTP, so maybe mobile connections, I guess. So it seems that the customer said it's out of the context, the scope of the project.
Yeah,
but
and we did get challenged on that, but I had it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, but you said that it's out of the scope. I was saying, oh, didn't you include one emulations and include the net constraints of that scan guns that could potentially add some more constraints on the module that you were testing?
Yeah, so absolutely. If I'd been responsible for the entire performance, then I would have followed up with the network test and the handgun test. But this was it was in writing. Said this is the back end, and this is the piece here. But you're absolutely right. But they were taking care of that elsewhere. But you're right. That's important.
Okay. So we had a question from Andy Layton, but you already answered it. So you say, how long was that project? So you said 3 months. So I guess you already answered that. Okay. Otherwise, I will ask the other PAC member connected. So Mark and Jan. So Jan, do you have any questions? I will start with Jan and then follow up with the Mark. Jan, do you have any questions regarding Helen's presentation?
Oh, Ian, you're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute, Jan.
It's lovely to see you.
Yes.
No, so
we see you.
You could use sign language to send your question in.
So I'm not fully fluent in sign language yet, so.
No, we didn't.
So maybe you're not on mute, so I guess potentially you didn't select the proper mic, or I don't know. Maybe while Jan is resolving your issues, Mark, do you have any questions regarding Helen's presentation?
Sure. Helen, thank you very much for presenting this. I think it was really, really good, particularly was sharing actually some of the real world impacts in a warehouse, in the actual people relating outside of the digital realm as to why this is performance is important and why the actual floor operations in a warehouse depend on these things. What was in the inception of the project? How did you get involved, and did you actually ever get to go to a warehouse and see this being applied?
No.
That would have been fun.
No, I know I would have. I would have loved to go. I rarely get to go to the coalface. But they're live in multiple warehouses now, and so it was a while ago. So I believe things are going okay.
Cool. That's good. I think in the shifting left for performance, we need to make driving a forklift part of that. If you're testing warehouse systems, how can I know how this should perform unless I get to drive the forklift, right?
I'm so with you.
But anyway, thank you very much. It was actually really detailed, and thanks for presenting. It was great.
Ian, do you have sound?
Yeah.
Ian's there now.
No, we don't hear you yet. Still not. Maybe you should try to reconnect back. It could happen that, I don't know, for some reason, if you're using the Chrome extensions, the sound was not properly connected. That could happen.
Yes.
While Jan is resolving his issues, You mentioned about the complexity of the data itself of a data warehouse, because obviously if you want to do an outbound, you need to pick the product from the warehouse. You mentioned all the algorithm behind, so I guess there was the challenge of generating the data sets was not part of your responsibilities, but I was there was one of our first questions: how do you manage this thing? So I think that's you already answered that. So I think because we have a similar project, not with ASAP, going on. So it's the solution they choose. They're using it's Manhattan. So Manhattan is also very popular in the warehouse management. And you have the similar constraints. But the difference here in Manhattan is that the scan guns are not connected through HTTP or mobile. They are using the old-fashioned terminal emulator, so SSH connections. Like
SSH
so
and
it's quite
VT100 or VT220, I think.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah.
Breaker, can you hear me, guys?
There he is.
Yeah,
Hello,
awesome.
Ian.
Hey,
Come in, Ian.
Hi there. Sorry about that. I wasn't purposely trying to avoid speaking.
Clearly
That
not.
was great, Helen. Very interesting. It reminds me of
hello.
I haven't performance tested SAP for some time, but the challenges that you mentioned suddenly came back big time.
You won't sleep well tonight.
No. I remember having particular trouble with certain grid controls that were part of certain SAP screens that were very difficult to automate reliably. And
yes, they're particularly nasty, those ones. Yes.
But that was great. That was great.
We've lost your video, Ian.
Yeah, we just have the sound. I don't know.
Can't win them all.
Let's try that.
Almost there.
Is that?
I know we still only have either your voice, either the webcam.
hang
you're
on.
back. Wait.
Yeah, my internet connection might not be.
It's good.
Is that better?
Yeah.
You can see me.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. It's technology for you. No, that was very interesting. I'm very keen to try the Neoload SAP GUI support. I may have an opportunity coming up, so it's nice being first kid on the block. Anyway.
So I think it's to be honest, if you go, I think it's been released today. The 6.5 has been released today.
Oh, wow.
So you can officially download that and have a try the ACP stuff if you want.
Okay. That would have been perfect for this project.
I promised to the audience that I won't talk about Neodis and Neoload, but shit, I did it. Sorry.
We
I won my €20 bet. Brilliant. Sorry. No.
Okay. So we have 15 minutes before. If you have any other questions, we can make a break. While we are making that break, I just would like to thank you personally, Stéphane Brunet, which is he doesn't want to show up on the camera. I don't know why. He's a shy guy, but he just a lot of people has requested today to have the presentation available, and I can confirm that they are now live on every speaker's page at the neodis.com/performance advisory console. So if you want to have a look at the presentation, the PDF format is already live. So if any attendee is looking to see the presentation offline and look at it, they can already do that. So thanks, Stéphane. So you're welcome. It's the ghost. You know, it's one of the ghosts there.
I will.
All right, so I suggest that we make a short break. So it's 19:13 local time in France. I will probably connect 5 minutes before your presentation, Ian. So your presentation is supposed to start at 19:30. I will connect 5 minutes before so I can make the introduction. And I would like to thank Helen again because that was a really awesome presentation.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
It's really nice to have a nice
It was great.
live project and the way you presented it was really really interesting, and I learned a lot of things. Thank you for that.
Thanks.